Welcome back to Propaganda by the Seed. This week, I've got a very interesting interview with Neftalí Duran, where we cover a broad breadth of various corn-related topics. It's a great interview. There are a few weird glitches and audio artifacts that are mostly in the beginning, so stick with it, and the audio does get a little better. Also, just for context, this was recorded in January, so any mentions of cold, snowy winters, that's why. But before we get into that, let's hear from our friends at the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
KiteLine is a weekly 30-minute radio program focusing on issues in the prison system. You'll hear news along with stories from prisoners and former prisoners as well as their loved ones. You'll learn what prison is, how it functions, and how it impacts all of us.
Behind the prison walls, a message is called a kite. Whispered words, a note passed hand to hand, a request submitted to the guards for medical care. Illicit or not, sending a kite means trusting that other people will bear it farther along until it reaches its destination. Here on KiteLine, we hope to share these words across the prison walls.
You can hear us on the Channel Zero network and find out more at kitelineradio.noblogs.org.
Welcome to Propaganda by the Seed, Neftalí Duran.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So I like to start off the podcast asking people about kind of what they're up to, especially in relation to plants and how you work with them and how you came to be doing those things.
Yeah, I just got back from Mexico. We started a reforestation project in Oaxaca in 2020. We've been planting trees and in general doing like a holistic reforestation, holistic ways of like thinking about water conservation and other things. And my partner and I were just down there teaching people and working with people on how to prune apples, peaches, winter trees that go dormant on the winter. So we're just doing that, and we just came back. And I when I'm in the States, I live in Massachusetts. It's pretty, New England. It's pretty cold, but nice, and we're getting some snow, so that's good in general. It feels like the last few years we haven't been getting enough snow, which changes the whole ecosystem for later in the year.
Yeah, definitely. If it's going to be cold, we might as well get some snow.
Exactly.
What is the name of the reforestation project?
It's called Proyecto Rosenda, named after my grandmother, who was not only the matriarch of the family, but was also an herbalist. She delivered babies and was overall like very knowledgeable in plants and nature. And sadly, she didn't teach her daughters how to carry on that work, but she did teach some of the granddaughters. Um, Although granddaughters, like one of my sisters, went into nursing instead of traditional medicine, but still like involved, still know a lot about that.
Yeah, well, at least you passed it on to someone. That's good. You mentioned apples and peaches. Are those the primary species you're working with, or are you other ones as well?
No, we're mixing for the reforestation project. We're working mostly with natives, but we're also introducing fruit trees as part of the effort to make sure the people also have not only an incentive to plant the other trees, but also hopefully small pocket food forests for the future. Obviously, apples, peaches, pears were introduced to Oaxaca, but they have become part of the diet, part of the ecosystem as well. So that's why we work with them. Some other trees that we work with that are a little bit more native is the jocote, which is it's part of the hawthorn family. I can't remember the English name, but it's a small crab apple that is yellow. The fruit matures in the closer to the holidays in the winter, and is used around Christmas. And then guava, figs, and loquat do really well surprisingly at that altitude, which is about 7,000 feet.
Interesting. Yeah, I was actually a little surprised to hear apple. I wouldn't have thought of that as something that would grow well down there, but I guess they're pretty adaptable.
Yeah, and also the state of Oaxaca is pretty diverse geographically.
Mm.
The
I guess mountains can
Yeah,
change the situation significantly.
yeah. So the where my mom lives, it's about 7,000 feet, but and an hour and 15 minutes down the hill, you have the center, the valleys of Oaxaca, and it's a completely different ecosystem. You wouldn't be able to grow apple down in the valley of Oaxaca, but you go, an hour and a half, and it's a completely different ecosystem.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And I know you've been involved with I Collective. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Just what that is and what you did with them?
Yeah, that's a project that started as part of a conversation about um, indigenous foodways and Thanksgiving in 2017. Um, it was used pretty much. We started that project in New York City um, with friends that were doing a conversation around food, culture, and political issues. Before the I Collective, there was a conversation, a dinner series and conversation with Jewish diaspora and Palestinian chefs to talk about the issues going on in Palestine and in indigenous Native American communities. And that just really opened conversation about how to be in community and support one another. In 2017, it started just more like a project of doing dinners in New York City. A lot of people were very gracious and not only letting us use their restaurants, but literally opening their homes and helping financially. So at that point, I think it was 12 or 14 of us that came together in 2017, and we did an anti-Thanksgiving dinner conversation in two different restaurants, and that just like became the catalyst for the I Collective to be born, and for a group of Native American people from around the country, Canada and Mexico, to be in an ongoing conversation about issues facing our communities. And it's pretty. The project itself has always been pretty autonomous and um, decentralized. Everyone is doing work in their own communities, and sometimes we happen to come together, and there are members that work together, every year in different projects. But we all support each other, and pretty much became a hub for people with for people with politics a little bit more left of center could come and have conversations. At that point, the Native American food movement was growing, but in my personal opinion, there wasn't a space for dissent and for real hard conversations about the issues facing communities. Just a random example. For example, we can idealize the Native American food sovereignty movement and think, oh, wow, these people are gonna go forage and are gonna like use these ingredients and those ingredients. But in reality, most Native American communities don't have access to food, any food, right? It's a pretty hard truth. So we have to have all those conversations. Yes, some of us have the opportunity and the privilege to be able to go forage at fishing or hunting and put dinners together for a lot of money or for little money, whatever it is, and make that happen. But a lot of people don't have access to land, don't have access to their ingredients, don't have the knowledge to like go forage, even if they're members of a tribe, card carrying members of tribal communities. They have been living in the city for a generation or two, and don't their grandparents, their parents didn't teach them, or they didn't know because of residential schools. So it became a hub for like-minded folks to like have those conversations, not only with ourselves but with other people.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like really interesting work. Is that project kind of ongoing, kind of everyone working in their own way?
Yeah, it's ongoing. Everyone works, continues to do the work, and we support each other however we can. And in this case, myself, at some point I decided to go back to Oaxaca, where I was born, and, and focus on my community, on my mom's community, and really do hands-on work where I can see when I can literally see the trees grow and see the change we're making.
Yeah. There is a, I don't know, a beauty in planting a tree and watching it grow. It's very concrete.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially in the US, we some of us get to like experience different spaces, and we can just talk about it all we want. But if we don't know how to grow corn, how to grow our traditional foods, I don't think we're doing it right. And that was actually a lesson from an elder at a gathering. Um, this elder pretty much told a few of us that were cooking or that were chefs was telling us like, okay, you guys, make beautiful food and it looks really neat and you charge money and stuff, but do you know how to grow your own corn?
Hmm.
And most of us at that point haven't done that. So it was, you know, it didn't feel good at the moment, but over the years, I understand that.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a excellent segue into our A topic of corn. And if you want to start off with kind of a bit about what the origins of corn is, where it came from.
Yeah, the science, the academic research, it has been changing in the last few decades, but we know the origins of corn are in Mesoamerica. Uh, for Mexican corn specifically, we were talking about the states of Puebla, Oaxaca, and Guerrero. Usually, scientists or researchers say that it originates in Guerrero and around Rio Balsas, but it's hard to it's hard to it's hard to pinpoint, and not that I don't believe their research or I want to diminish their research, they're working with carbon dating, and indigenous communities, we believe that we're working with like stories and traditional knowledge that is not that you're not gonna find in academia. In this case, I've been to the corn cave, one of the corn caves in Puebla, where they carbon dated corn around 9,000 years ago. And then I've been to the valley of Oaxaca around Mitla, where Union Zapata is the name of the town, where they also carbon dated corn around 10,000 years ago or something. And I can imagine, because I've traveled all those places, I can imagine how commerce and exchange made all of that possible. Not only you're having populations they were pretty advanced for agriculturally advanced for those times, but also you had a lot of commerce and you had a lot of exchange between in the state of Puebla. You have the city of Cholula outside of the city of Puebla, where was the epicenter of commerce between the Maya, the uh, the Olmecs, tribes from the north of Mexico City and north, and then all the tribes from Oaxaca. So you can see how it is possible the seeds, ideas moved and cross paths along those ways, and you can also see how not only agriculture but culture in general originates and evolves in that place, because obviously if you have communities that were fishing, hunting, gathering, whatever they were doing before corn, and you go and see those high desert altitude you fields, you can understand, oh yeah, they used to come here and they used to hunt and they used to gather fruit and they used to gather a prickly pear, and there's all these medicinal herbs. And then when they started growing corn, they had to either stay here for the season or go and come back to harvest. And you can understand physically how that would work.
And my understanding is that corn was bred out of a plant called teosinte.
Yeah, teocintle, which is a guayal grass that still exists. Many farmers in Mexico still grow teocintle as a ceremonial grain, but but you can also use it, and it evolves from a guayal grass to what we know now as corn, but it also evolves regionally to many different kinds of corns.
What can you tell me about the milpa system or systems? I don't know if that word is used across different regions for kind of different things, or if it's kind of one unified thing.
Yeah, I think it's unifying across Mexico, the milpa system, meaning the people are companion planting not only corn, squash, beans, but anything else that you may be able to eat. It's very common to have the three sisters. Well, in the U.S. we know as three sisters, but also you have other things like um, there's the whole family of Chelites, which are like green edible plants. It's a huge family, and depending on the region, you also want those ones to grow because that's the greens that you're gonna eat throughout the season. And at some point also, depending on the region and the cultural beliefs, you're also adding dead of the dead flowers or other things that may benefit you. But traditionally, corn, beans, and squash are the three major ones. Uh, that's a um, that's a almost a complete diet per se, and then you have winter crops. You can dry the corn. If you have a hardy squash, it'll last you the whole winter, and beans as well.
Cool. Um, and how does milpa system integrate or interact with more perennial agriculture? I've heard some stuff about milpas kind of rotating and turning into more perennial systems.
Elaborate a little bit more.
Um, so what I've heard, and I don't know that this is necessarily true, so I'd love to hear your perspective, is that milpas were sort of, um, cut out of, you would make a disturbance in order to be able to grow annuals, corn, beans, and squash, amongst others. And then as that site was used, for a while, um, other more perennial crops might get planted in that spot that would grow up and turn into a perennial system, and then you would start a new milpa in another spot.
That is true in some regions. That probably used to be true more in the past. The reality is that with the introduction of chemical fertilizers, many communities don't rotate anymore.
Mm,
So
gotcha.
you have because of the use of chemicals, people deplete the soil. And I want to be clear that I'm not shaming the people, but I'm trying to like understand the system of why. So when you have access to chemical fertilizers, and you have the U.S. The Mexican government pushing for the use of it in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, subsidizing that fertilizer. So people have become accustomed to doing that instead of rotating. In an ideal world, people do rotate their crops, and that maintains an ecosystem a little healthier. Um, it is also, but there's many challenges to these conversations, right? Not only let's imagine even if a family, a small family, has enough land to rotate, has enough land to like have many different fields to rotate year to year or every 5 years or whatever. That's a start. Let's say that you have that, then like, do you have access to oxen? Do you, or otherwise, do you have access to pay for a tractor to like come and till the land? Are you, you know, in this case, do you have children? You have teenagers that are gonna help you, or is it just you? And that changes the whole conversation. And especially in Oaxaca, we have whole towns, whole communities. We call them ghost towns because most people of working age, men and women, have left for the cities or for the U.S. to work, and only very few people remain, elders and kids. So I think one of the greatest challenges to to food sovereignty is the fact that there's not enough people willing or able to farm the land. Same in the US, same as in the US. The US faces also a great challenge. I believe if I remember correctly, the average age of a farmer is like 65.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The that demographic is aging out. And certainly that is especially relevant when you want to talk about like interesting regenerative systems that always seem to require a ton of hand labor. You need
Yeah.
lots of people and people who work really hard to do that compared to, mechanized stuff with huge tractors and tons of chemicals and whatever.
Yeah, and we've experienced this personally right now, not only with my family, my immediate family. So, for example, I have uncles in their 70s, 80s. They still grow their own corn that they've been growing for six, seven decades themselves. And it's very interesting to see, like, my mom doesn't grow the same corn as my uncle. Another uncle may grow a different corn, right? But but if they're in their 70s or 80s, they need a lot more support, and also it's a very delicate balance. So, for example, my mom this year was able to grow a little bit of corn, and she planted a lot of beans. But because her community has been doing such a good job at preserving animal life, meaning deer. So right now there's no permit on hunting, and there hasn't been for a couple of decades. But there's too many deer now.
Mm,
So a family of deer or came and like ravaged the whole field of beans. So she doesn't have beans for the winter. So it's a very delicate balance. Everything is a very delicate balance. Another good example is, for example, uh, you know, let's say this year I'm able to get my hands on 5,000 tree saplings that are native, right? Ideally, I want to plant all of them and I want to distribute it in different plots with different families, different communities, so they have a good chance of growing. Most likely, I cannot find a crew to uh, to plant them, in like 6 weeks. Maybe I can find a crew to plant them in 12 weeks. But what if by week 6 or 7 it stops raining? Then the chances of those saplings, of survival are lower. And then we face other dilemmas. So, for example, I know that if I was able to, I can get a bobcat with an attachment to drill the hole for trees. I can probably, I don't know, let's say if I had a bobcat with an attachment, that machine can probably drill a hole in 5 minutes instead of like a person doing it in an hour or 2 hours. So that increases the capacity to grow, but also I'm changing the system of not only how we're planting, but also to some degree, am I taking away jobs from the locals?
yeah, it's all very complicated. And
Yeah.
that really plays into that like, the prime working age people have left for the cities or other places and are not there to support the agricultural system.
And even if we wanted to come back, there is no way to make a living. You know, especially in these political times, really important to put into perspective why people leave their communities, right? Including me. I came to Los Angeles when I was 18 years old. I was a teenager when I came to LA, and I've been here since then. If I wanted, if a young person right now, if an 18-year-old person wanted to stay in Oaxaca and do field work, um, you're getting paid. Let's say if you're getting paid really well, you're getting paid, let's say, close to $20 a day, not an hour, a
Yeah.
day. Okay. Uh, but with inflation, gentrification, and everything else, the cost of living is the cost of food is really high. And because we're talking about corn, um, this week, the kilo of tortilla that you can buy, the cheapest kilo of tortilla that you can buy in in a at a store went up to 26 pesos, which is like $1.30. But if you have a family of four, a family of six, you're gonna need like 2 or 3 or 4 kilos a day because Mexican we eat tortillas for 3 meals a day. So just to put into perspective the importance of corn, the importance of having access to your own seed, to your own corn, but also how all of that plays into an economic system where either you migrate to be able to feed your family, or you stay and you don't make enough money to feed your family.
Yeah. The numbers just aren't working out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we'll circle back to that in a few minutes and dig into that a little deeper. Another thing I wanted to ask about, kind of surrounding the origins of corn, is nixtamalization. Um, first question, how is that properly pronounced?
Yeah.
Or
Nixtamalization.
okay, cool.
There's probably there's probably other words, but basically, I'm sure you've talked about this in this podcast, but there's a, it's just basically the science behind making sure that the corn is digestible and edible, and we get some nutritional value from it. And the my understanding, the history of it is the people most likely, same region, Mesoamerica, is experimented with ash first, with ash as the conduit for nixtamalization, and over hundreds of years or thousands of years, that shifted to limestone because there used to be and there are big great deposits of limestone that made it easier and faster to nixtamalize. But you can see ash being used still by northern tribes up here, where they still use ash for their nixtamalization, which hasn't changed.
In Mexico, is pretty much all corn that's eaten nixtamalized, or is there also some dishes that use unnixtamalized corn? Because I think of, like you mentioned, tortillas, you're eating 3 meals a day, and that's made of nixtamalized corn. But is there also unnixtamalized corn in some things?
Yeah, I mean the good example of not nixtamalized corn is elotes, street corn that
Okay, yeah.
is boiled, but it's not nixtamalized, so it's not gonna it's delicious and you're gonna eat it, but I don't know how much nutrition value you're gonna get out of it. But there's nixtamalization for tortillas and anything related to tortillas. There's a big family of like foods that we eat from tortillas, but there's also all the, what do you call it? All the atoles and everything else that is fermented corn and other things that you ferment it, you change the composition, or you make it into a drink by fermenting or boiling after nixtamalization, and it changes the dynamic.
Cool. So what can you tell me about the spread of corn agriculture in thousands of years ago out of the sort of homeland in southern Mexico?
As I said a while ago, I mean, it's been part of the exchange routes, and now we can prove that for a long, long time. Academia used to say that like they didn't think that there were like trading routes all the way up here. The idea was that like all communities just like evolve in silos, and now we know that that's not true. They found they've been they've found they've been finding that people used to come from all the way from Peru to Mexico and everywhere else. So same as anything else, there's been exchange of ideas, probably marriages, war and everything else amongst different peoples. And corn and food is one of the things that has made its way up north, and it obviously has adapted to the different regions. In this case, like up north here, we have corns that are completely different to the ones in Oaxaca, especially the ones that grow in colder climates where it snows. They're not the same corn, but they probably originate in the same region.
Yeah. What would you say sets the more northern varieties aside from the Oaxacan varieties?
My understanding they have evolved for different purposes. So more for like flour as opposed to nixtamalization.
Interesting. And obviously corn in more recent history has become like a major industrial thing. Like the whole Midwest is covered in just giant industrial corn monocrops that are subsidized. And um, what can you tell me about how that American industrial corn culture has affected the Mexican corn tradition?
I think that we have to set it by the premise that the U.S. subsidizes the big four, right? Corn, rice, wheat, and soy. And those are the crops that are not only get subsidized at the tune of insane amount of money, but it's a way of the U.S. maintaining control of markets. Um, so it's a how that has changed. I think recently a lot of us have seen how because of the free trade agreement, what used to be NAFTA, the U.S. will be able to. Mexico didn't want it to, but will be able to sell more genetically modified corn to Mexico at a lower price. At a lower price because it's subsidized. So it's not a fair playing field. There's many ways of looking at it, but the immediate what the Mexican scientists were fighting for is the understanding the um the grains that are riddled with pesticides affect the human body. But culturally also, where if people are not growing corn, we're gonna we'll start to slowly erode the culture of corn, and then the economics change. You go from autonomous peoples that can grow their food to having to buy corn to be able to make your tortillas.
Gotcha. So it's sort of cheap subsidized corn from the United States kind of makes it harder to maintain the indigenous production of that, and then you start to lose both the seed stock because people aren't growing out, your uncle's corn and your other uncle's corn and your grandmother's corn. Um, but it's also kind of plays into that economic situation where there's, the wages aren't supporting people aren't getting a living wage and have to buy the cheapest thing available.
Exactly, and it's a vicious cycle as well. Then people have to migrate, and we're gonna migrate north.
Yeah, well, it's a fucked up situation amongst a million fucked up situations. Um, so another interesting corn thing that I've been hearing about the last couple years is a lot of interest in nitrogen fixing corn from Oaxaca.
Yeah, I've been a little bit reluctant to talk about that one, but it is now in the mainstream. We've known for many generations or for many decades at least that it existed. People talk about it. People in communities like tell stories about it. We know that it exists. I believe someone from UC Davis is the one that like first started studying that in the 80s, and it's a double-edged sword. Overall, as someone from community from indigenous communities, academia always comes at you as research as something positive, but we also have to remember that academia has always been part of the system of colonization, and there's always going to be other other ambitions with the research. So yes, this court exists. I don't know if legally there are protections in place in Mexico to be able to make sure that it doesn't get it doesn't become another cash crop, but it does exist. I've grown it. I've grown it here actually in the Northeast, and it's a really amazing plant. But it's a delicate subject. At the end of the day, who do the seeds belong to?
That was
You know,
exactly my next
and how,
question.
yeah, and how they're gonna be used is like, and who's making the decisions of how they're gonna be used is extremely important on when making decisions. Are people actually going to maintain their autonomy and the say so over their seats, or it just becomes another seat in someone's catalog? And we've seen this. We've seen how this changes and how this evolves in very insidious ways. I'll give you an example. The um, rice. There are ways to like increase the capacity of rice and have GM, GM rice, and usually academia or companies will come at you with the idea, oh, but this will save people from starving. And at face value, it's like, okay, yeah, that's great. Let's grow that so that there's people, so the people are not starving. But the reality is that we grow and we produce more food than we need in the world, right? It just doesn't get to, we have more food than we ever need in the world to feed everyone. It just doesn't get to everyone. The system is the food system has been optimized for profit and not to make sure the people have food. I say this time and time again. In the U.S., we waste about 40% of what we produce. We all do it. The whole industry wastes a lot of food. So the problem is not a necessity. The problem is how the system is set up so that you have to buy food.
So on the topic of the nitrogen fixing corn, do you feel like there could be a way of ethically growing that variety or those varieties on a broader scale while still respecting the indigenous groups that have developed and maintained that variety?
It's a really hard question to answer because the whole industry, is is controlled by very specific companies. So no, I don't know. And like if the GM corn right now is a good testament of like where the power lays right now within Mexico and the US. And we're seeing the US can bully Mexico into flooding the market with cheap corn. So why would we believe that like trusting another seed to the system is gonna be any better or different?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just out of curiosity, did that variety grow well in the Northeast?
It needs time to adapt. It needs to not time to adapt, but it does grow.
Interesting. Yeah, because when I heard about it, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And that nitrogen fixing property is not just of the corn, it's this complex symbiosis. And would the other probably bacterial elements of the symbiosis, would they grow happily
Yeah,
outside of um, you know, where the region that they originated from?
yeah. And also, we didn't test it. We didn't do anything else with it because same ethical, questions like dilemmas of like, you know, yes, I was gifted these seeds, but are they mine? You know, am I
Yeah.
supposed to like go and send them to a university to get tested, or do I just grow it and see how it does? And, that's the end of that.
Yeah. There's such a complex ethical quandary when something belongs to a community. Um, and how, I don't know. I feel like I at least don't have much experience dealing with those relations of like community property because it's just not much of a thing around here.
But a wheat is another good idea, good example of this, right? Wheat comes to Oaxaca, comes to Mexico so the Spanish arrived to Oaxaca in 1519. So I can imagine the production of wheat comes to Oaxaca in the uh, 1520s and has become part of like the diet and the staple. In the Mixteca region of Oaxaca, where my family is from, you make 50% corn, 50% wheat tortillas.
Hmm.
And then people also make 100% with grain tortillas. Um, there are communities that still grow a lot of wheat, and there are communities that have lost the production. But a couple of years ago, some a seed club, a seed company from Colorado sent me wheat grain. This seed place have been growing and allegedly goes back to the 1500s, right? I brought it back to Oaxaca and it's sitting there on a shelf, but we haven't grown it yet. But I imagine that in the future we may give it a try, just to like save the seed and see how it does. I imagine it will do well, but it's one of those things that sometimes in the right hands with people that worry or care about ethics and the history of seeds and respect for culture and people, it may be a good idea to have either nitrogen fixing corn in very specific hands and or other grains and other seeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a lot of details involved and a lot to figure out. And like you were saying, like whose decision is it to make? Um, is a very complicated question that might not have a clear answer.
Yeah, and also for seeds are for sharing. Seeds are for sharing, and seeds traditionally and naturally exchange hands, uh, all the time. People are very generous. People understand that you grow crops and save seed to share with your neighbors, with your family, with your community. But but I think that there has to be an understanding and an ongoing practice of making sure the there is not gonna be something that you're gonna exploit. The last few years, I don't know, the last 5 years, I guess I've been in the spring. I usually send X amount of people seeds throughout the country of different corns. Especially, I want to send seed, especially to people from Oaxaca. They live in the diaspora in the U.S. and don't have access to corn, beans, squash. Mainly because they cannot go to Oaxaca uh, or the seed companies have Oaxacan seed that is not from Oaxaca. So I take it upon myself to send it to ship it to people. And all I ask from people is to make sure that you grow it, that you save it, you share it with people, but in a way that is responsible. It's not for you to like open a tortilla business. It's not for you to open a restaurant unless we have that conversation specifically, right? But it's a way of sharing, and it's a way of making sure that those seeds continue to be in community.
Excellent. One of the nicest things about growing seed is sharing it with someone who's really excited about it and will treat it with respect.
Yeah, and also, for example, the seed from my uncle who's in his 80s, like who's gonna save it? Like who's gonna grow it? How are we gonna take care of it? Even if he's not directly telling us, anything, but we know that like if he doesn't grow his seed, are his daughter, his granddaughters, his grandkids gonna grow it?
Yeah. Yeah, the safest place to store a variety is in community.
Yeah,
So another interesting corn phenomena, and I don't know how to pronounce the name. The name you sometimes hear is corn smut, which is not a great
yeah.
name, but could you well, first tell me what the proper pronunciation of the Mexican name is, or Spanish name, um, and then what it is and what you do with it.
Yeah, it's with lacoche, and it's yeah, as you said, it's a corn fungus, a corn smut. The overtakes the the overtakes the corn, and you can use it for eating. It's a delicious. It's like black gold. It's very delicious on quesadillas, on soup and other things, and it's become part of like this story of like one of the other benefits and beautiful things about corn, um, that the people are intrigued to and wanna taste in the U.S. To be very, very honest with you, I don't think I've had like really good corn smut in the US because it obviously travel a long way and or is grown in the US and it just doesn't have the same taste.
Interesting.
It's never the same. So if you ever want to try it in Mexico, try it like, get it from a market where it's gonna where it's gonna taste different. Uh, I guess it's well, if you like mushrooms, you know the deliciousness of like a wild mushroom as opposed to like a store-bought one that has been sitting there for a while. It's just not the same. But the fascination with it goes beyond just like the taste of it. There's been controversial things about with La Coche in the US specifically, including the one that this famous chef who is white and has made a lot of money exploiting the food of Oaxaca and the culture of Oaxaca, wanted to patent with the farmer, wanted to patent the process of um, inoculating the fungi for commercial purposes. Obviously, there was a huge uproar from those of us on social media, and I don't know, I haven't looked it up, but it is something that you technically it is legal for them to apply for a patent and they figure out a way to like inoculate it, right? But just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
You
that seems
can't
very scummy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you live in Maine. It's like, it's like if it's like if someone Maine lobster is a staple of an identity of the state, right? It's
Yeah.
like another state being like, no, lobster is our thing, you know, we're gonna like do something to say that is, lobster is our identity now.
What is the flavor of that food when it has the proper flavor in Mexico?
It's a truffle. It's really a truffle.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, you can imagine, it's a fungi, so it's a truffle. It's really delicious. And then but you have to imagine it and think of it also as in the composition of corn. And in this case, most likely you'll have it in quesadilla. So you have a fresh corn quesadilla with cheese from Oaxaca, which is quesillo, is the string cheese from Oaxaca, and epazote, which is another herb that is very fragrant, and it just works all together. And then you add a little bit of salsa, and you have the perfect bite.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. And in Oaxaca, is it just something that kind of shows up sometimes, or is it inoculated, or there's practices to kind of encourage it to grow?
It just traditionally people just have it when it happens naturally in their fields. But because we're in capitalism and we want everything all the time, a lot of farmers in central Mexico grow it, I believe, almost year round. So there's a whole industry of people that figure out how to inoculate and how to like infect the fields and harvest it to sell to restaurants, to markets, to anti-selling food on the side of the road. Everyone has access to it. And I believe I was seeing on Instagram recently that there's a company that started doing that in California, I guess. Um, so it's happening. Uh, if there is a market, people will figure out how to bring it to market.
Yeah, kind of kind of hard to avoid, I suppose. Well, my final question for you is what can you share about good practices for growing your own corn?
Because corn is very tied to the identity of tribal communities, indigenous communities. Uh, let's say in Maine or in the Northeast, New England, or anywhere you are, if you want to grow corn specific to those regions, to the region where you're living, take the time, even if it takes time and effort and a little bit of money, take the time to actually know the tribal communities where you're residing. A lot of those tribal communities most likely will have a cultural person, or will have powwows, or will have seed swaps. Go and ask, go approach people and say like, oh, I'm living here, I would love to like learn a little bit more about the corn of these places, and grow it, and grow it in a way that the owners, not only the people of the land, but also your own ancestry, right? The owners, like, whatever corn nowadays has become a staple of almost every community around the world, right? It's fascinating to me the corn made it to China, we believe, like in the 1600s, which is insane to think. The corn went like all the way around the world. It has been part of the Chinese diet for a few hundred years now. Same as Africa, same as other places. So just grow it in a way that honors not only the people, that makes you think about the land and the stewardship of the land, but also the makes you closer to your own community roots.
Excellent advice. Um, is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation before we wrap up, or anything I missed?
Let me see if there's anything else. No, I think we talked a lot, almost about everything. Um, yeah, I think overall, I'm grateful for this conversation, and especially framed around seeds and people.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on. I've wanted to do an episode about corn for a while, and finally getting to do it with you. I think it has been a fascinating conversation, and yeah, you had a lot of great stuff to say about corn. If the listeners want to follow your work, where could they find you if you want to be found?
Yeah, mostly on Instagram. Is my name, Neftalí Duran _. And yeah, Instagram and Facebook, most of the things that are related to my work are public, so you can go check it out.
Great, and I will link those in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you.
Yeah, and lastly, also, if people want to support our reforestation project in Oaxaca, we also have a page. It's Proyecto Rosenda, and we're in the middle of fundraiser for this season. Last year, we planted around 5,000 trees, and we depleted our nursery capacity because we're working on doing automatic irrigation this year. But we're hoping to raise a little bit of money, mostly mutual aid, meaning people to people. We don't write a lot of grants. We just the way that I ask people for money is like, if you enjoy Oaxacan food, culture, um, spirits, help us maintain a local ecosystem. Let's make sure that our communities in Oaxaca have water and access to food sovereignty for generations to come.
That sounds like a great project to support, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. I don't have any listener-submitted audio to put here, so if you'd like to hear a little something extra at the end of a episode, feel free to send me a song or a story from your garden or a description of a garden experiment that you tried. And you can send that to propagandabytheseed@riseup.net.